Sometimes the most terrifying nightmares aren't the ones we wake up from. They're the ones that follow us in broad daylight year after year. What you're about to read isn't fiction. This is the story of a family torn apart by evil and a mother who never stopped searching. Have you ever wondered what you would do if your loved ones vanished without a trace? How long would you keep looking? How far would you go? For Sarah Williams, the answer was simple: whatever it takes for as long as it takes. In the fall of 1984, Thomas Williams and his 8-year-old daughter Emily set out on what should have been a routine weekend trip through the picturesque mountains of Oregon. They never returned home. For 16 long years, their disappearance remained one of the state's most baffling cold cases until a chance discovery at a rural junkyard set in motion a chain of events that would uncover a web of horror and depravity that no one could have imagined. This is a story about the darkness that lurks on America's highways, the predators who hide in plain sight, and the resilience of a mother's love in the face of unimaginable evil. What you're about to read contains disturbing details of real criminal behavior, but also the triumph of the human spirit against the most impossible odds. Buckle up. This is going to be a hell of a ride, Timo. In 1984, a young girl and her father from Portland, Oregon, vanished during a weekend road trip, leaving the mother at home with unimaginable grief and unanswered questions for over a decade. But 16 years later, a junkyard owner finds something shocking among the discarded cars, a haunting discovery that would change everything. The autumn sun filtered through the windows of Sarah Williams's living room in Portland, Oregon, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Sarah sat quietly on her floral-patterned sofa, the television remote clutched tightly in her hand. Her mother, Eleanor, perched beside her face etched with the same anticipation and dread that had become ritual on this day each year. "It's almost time," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she increased the volume on the television. The local news program flickered on screen, and Sarah leaned forward, her eyes never leaving the set. For 16 years, she had paid local news stations to broadcast a missing persons alert on this day, the anniversary of when her family was torn apart. As the commercial segment began, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The screen displayed a family photograph, a handsome man with a thick mustache and warm eyes standing proudly beside a small girl with a bright smile. Beside the photo was an image of a gleaming red Cadillac. 16 years ago today, Thomas Williams and his 8-year-old daughter Emily disappeared during a weekend road trip, the announcer's voice stated. They were last seen driving a 1979 red Cadillac DeVille license plate THB 143. If you have any information regarding their whereabouts, please contact the Portland Police Department. Sarah clicked off the television, unable to bear the weight of the silence that followed. She glanced at her mother, noting the grim expression that had settled on her lined face. "I'll go upstairs to freshen up," Eleanor said, squeezing Sarah's hand before rising slowly from the couch. Sarah nodded, watching as her mother disappeared up the stairs. Left alone with her thoughts, Sarah crossed to the bookshelf that lined the far wall of the living room. Her fingers trailed across the spines of several books before stopping at a worn leather-bound photo album. She pulled it down and returned to the sofa, opening it with the care one might afford a sacred text. Page after page revealed moments frozen in time, Thomas standing proudly next to that Cadillac he'd worked so hard to afford. Emily on her first day of school. The three of them at the local park, their faces alight with joy. Sarah traced the outline of her daughter's face with a trembling finger. "Where are you?" she whispered to the photograph as she had countless times before. The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the silence, startling Sarah. She closed the album and set it aside before crossing to the kitchen to answer. "Hello," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "Mrs. Williams, this is Officer Davis with the Portland Police Department," came the reply. "I'm calling because we've just received a report of potential evidence being found at a junkyard in Eugene. We believe it could be related to your husband and daughter's case." Sarah's free hand clutched the counter for support. "What kind of evidence? We'd prefer not to discuss details over the phone, ma'am. Would you be available to come for identify what's been found? We can have a patrol car pick you up in about 10 minutes. "Yes," Sarah replied immediately, her heart pounding. "Yes, I'll be ready." She hung up the phone and hurried to the bottom of the stairs. "Mom," she called out, "the police just called. They found something at a junkyard in Eugene. They think it might be connected to Thomas and Emily." Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. What did they find? They wouldn't say, but they're sending a car to pick us up in 10 minutes. Eleanor descended the stairs quickly, her earlier weariness forgotten. I'm coming with you. They waited in tense silence until the patrol car arrived. The officer at the wheel introduced himself as Officer Martinez, but offered little conversation during the drive south to Eugene. Sarah watched the familiar Oregon landscape pass by in a blur, her thoughts racing with possibilities. Beside her, Eleanor clutched her purse tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. When they finally arrived at Miller's Auto Salvage, Sarah's stomach twisted at the sight of police vehicles and yellow crime scene tape cordoning off a section of the junkyard. Officer Martinez led them through the maze of junked vehicles toward a cluster of people gathered around something Sarah couldn't yet see. Detective Ramirez, Officer Martinez called out as they approached. Mrs. Williams and her mother are here. A tall man in plain clothes turned to greet them, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Parker, I'm Detective Ramirez. Thank you for coming so quickly. What did you find? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Detective Ramirez stepped aside, revealing what the group had been surrounding. Sarah's legs nearly gave out beneath her. There, crushed almost beyond recognition, but still unmistakable, was a red Cadillac DeVille. The once gleaming paint was now dull and rusted in places, but there was no doubt in Sarah's mind. This was Thomas's car, the one he had saved for years to buy, the one he had lovingly maintained, the one he and Emily had driven away in 16 years ago. Oh my God, Eleanor whispered beside her, gripping Sarah's arm for support. Sarah approached the vehicle slowly as if in a trance. The car had been partially crushed, presumably by the large excavator parked nearby. Police officers were photographing every angle of the vehicle while others appeared to be taking measurements and searching the area around it. We can't check the interior because of the condition, Detective Ramirez explained gently. But we need to confirm. Is this your husband's car, Mrs. Williams? Sarah circled the vehicle, her eyes scanning every detail. Finally, she stopped at what remained of the right rear wheel. She pointed to a small dent in the chrome wheel cover. Thomas hit a curb the week before they disappeared, she said, her voice distant. We were going to get it fixed, but... Her voice trailed off. She looked up at Detective Ramirez, her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. Yes, this is their car. Detective Ramirez nodded solemnly, then gestured to a man standing nervously at the edge of the crime scene. This is Frank Miller, the owner of the junkyard. He's the one who called us. Frank stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag before offering one to Sarah. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I had no idea about the car's history, I swear. It was scheduled to be crushed this morning, and I was in my office afterward when I saw the missing persons segment on TV. I recognized the car immediately and called the police. How did it get here? Sarah demanded, ignoring his outstretched iron hand. Who brought it in? Frank shifted uncomfortably. That's just it, ma'am. I don't have any record of it being brought in. It's not in our system at all. That sounds suspicious, Eleanor said sharply. Detective Ramirez held up a hand. Mr. Miller was the one who alerted us to the car's presence, Mrs. Parker. We have no reason to believe he was involved in its appearance here. I've been trying to figure out how it got here myself, Frank insisted. We have strict protocols for accepting vehicles. Paperwork, IDs, the works. As he spoke, a woman in greasy overalls approached the group. I saw Tyler bring it in, she said. All eyes turned to her. Tyler, Detective Ramirez asked. Tyler Bennett, Frank explained. He's my partner, runs the technical side of things. He's the head technician here. Detective Ramirez immediately pulled out his phone. We need to speak with him. Can you call him? Frank nodded and pulled out his own phone, dialing a number. After several moments, he shook his head. No answer. I'll need his home address, Detective Ramirez said firmly. Of course, Frank replied, pulling out a small notebook from his pocket and writing down an address. He lives in South Portland. Here's his information. Detective Ramirez took the paper and turned to one of his officers. I want a unit sent to this address immediately. Have them bring Mr. Bennett in for questioning. He turned back to Frank. Is there anything else of Mr. Bennett's on the premises that might be relevant to our investigation? His office, Frank said, but it's locked and only Tyler has the key. We'll need a warrant to search it properly, Detective Ramirez said, turning to another officer. Get that in motion. Sarah stood silently through this exchange, her eyes never leaving the crushed Cadillac. 16 years of wondering, of hoping against hope. And now this. The car that had carried her husband and daughter away from her for the last time was here, crushed beyond recognition, but no sign of Thomas or Emily. "Let's search the area," Detective Ramirez instructed his team. "Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Parker, if you feel up to it, your help in identifying any potential personal items would be invaluable." Sarah nodded mutely, and she and Eleanor followed the officers as they began to methodically search the junkyard. Hours passed as they examined piles of scrap metal and discarded items, but nothing related to Thomas or Emily surfaced. Eventually, they found themselves outside Tyler Bennett's locked office, waiting for either the man himself or the warrant that would allow them to search it. Sarah leaned against the wall, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Eleanor stood beside her, one arm wrapped around her daughter's shoulders, both women silent and deep in thought as the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky. The sun reached its peak when two police cruisers pulled into the junkyard. Sarah and Eleanor straightened as they saw a third vehicle, a dark blue pickup truck, following behind. The truck parked a short distance away, and a man in his mid-20s climbed out. He had short brown hair and wore work clothes with the junkyard's logo emblazoned on the breast pocket. Detective Ramirez approached him immediately. "Mr. Bennett." The man nodded, a look of confusion on his face. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" "The officer said you needed to speak with me urgently." "I'm Detective Ramirez," the detective said, extending his hand. "We're investigating the appearance of a red Cadillac in your junkyard, one that's connected to a 16-year-old missing persons case." Tyler's eyes widened slightly. "The car that was crushed this morning, I heard Frank called you guys about it." Detective Ramirez nodded towards Sarah and Eleanor. "This is Sarah Williams and her mother, Eleanor Parker. The Cadillac belonged to Mrs. Williams's husband, who disappeared with their daughter 16 years ago." Tyler approached the women, his expression appropriately somber. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Tyler Bennett." He offered his hand, which Sarah took after a moment's hesitation. "The car wasn't properly logged into your system," Detective Ramirez continued. "One of your coworkers said she saw you bring it in. We'd like to know how it came into your possession." Tyler ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "Yeah, that was a weird situation. About a week ago, an older man brought it in when Frank wasn't around, said he didn't have any use for the car anymore and wanted it destroyed." "Did he give you his name?" Detective Ramirez asked. Tyler shook his head. "No, and that's what was strange. He paid cash, a good amount, too. But when I tried to get his information for our records, he just ran off. Literally left the keys in the ignition and walked away. I called after him, tried to chase him, but he was gone." "Can you describe this man?" Detective Ramirez pressed. Tyler furrowed his brow in concentration. "Tall, maybe 6 feet, thin, building gray hair, though it looked like it might have been dark before. He had a mustache, a thick one, wore glasses and khaki pants, and a button-up shirt. Spoke real quiet, almost hard to hear him." Sarah's breath caught audibly. That sounds like Thomas," she whispered to Eleanor, her face pale. "What?" Eleanor said too loudly. "But that's impossible." Detective Ramirez turned to them. "Mrs. Williams, are you saying this description matches your husband?" Sarah nodded slowly, her hands trembling. "It could be. The height, the build, the mustache. Thomas always wore button-ups, even on weekends." Detective Ramirez looked back at Tyler. "How old would you say this man was?" "Hard to tell," Tyler replied. "Maybe 50s. Could have been younger, though. He looked tired, weathered, you know." Eleanor shook her head vigorously. "This doesn't make sense. Why would Thomas get rid of the Cadillac? He loved that car. He worked so hard for it. And why now?" Sarah added, her voice stronger. "After 16 years, and where is Emily?" Detective Ramirez held up a calming hand. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We need to investigate further." He turned back to Tyler. "We'd like to search your office, Mr. Bennett. One of your coworkers mentioned you keep it locked." Tyler nodded. "Yeah, of course, nothing to hide. It's just that we keep some valuable tools and parts catalogs in there. Follow me." As they walked toward the small building that housed the junkyard's offices, Sarah and Eleanor exchanged troubled glances. "Do you really think it could have been Thomas?" Eleanor whispered. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. It sounds like him. But why would he abandon the car after all this time? And where has he been? Where's Emily?" I don't believe Thomas would do that. Maybe this man is trying to confuse us, Eleanor suggested, her voice low. When they reached the office building, Tyler led them to a door at the end of a short hallway. He pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked it, stepping aside to let Detective Ramirez enter first. Please wait out here, Detective Ramirez told Sarah and Eleanor. We'll let you know if we find anything of interest. As the police entered the office, Eleanor suddenly clutched at her chest, her breathing becoming labored. Mom, Sarah said, alarmed. What's wrong? My asthma. Eleanor gasped, fumbling in her purse. I think the stress, my inhaler. Sarah helped her to a nearby bench. She found the inhaler at the bottom of Eleanor's purse and helped her mother use it, watching anxiously as Eleanor's breathing gradually steadied. I'm okay, Eleanor insisted after a few minutes, though her face remained pale. Just overwhelmed. I'm sorry for the trouble. Would you like us to call an ambulance? Detective Ramirez had rushed to her side. Eleanor shook her head firmly. No. I'll be fine, just need to rest a bit. While Sarah tended to her mother, the search of Tyler's office continued. Occasionally an officer would emerge with an item to show Sarah and Eleanor, but each time Sarah shook her head. None of the items belonged to Thomas or Emily. After nearly an hour, Detective Ramirez emerged from the office for the final time. We've completed our search, he told Sarah and Eleanor. Unfortunately, we didn't find anything directly connected to your husband or daughter. Sarah's shoulders slumped with disappointment. So we're no closer to understanding what happened. We've made progress, Detective Ramirez assured her. Finding the Cadillac is significant. Now we need to figure out who brought it here and why. He turned to Tyler. Mr. Bennett, we'd like you to come to the station to make a formal statement. Tyler nodded. Of course, whatever I can do to help. Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Parker, we'd appreciate it if you'd come as well, Detective Ramirez continued. We'd like to review the case details with you in light of this new evidence. We'll come with you, Sarah said firmly. I'll drive my own car, Tyler offered. I'm heading back toward Portland anyway. Detective Ramirez considered this for a moment, then nodded. That's fine. We'll expect you there within the hour. As they walked back to the police cruiser, Sarah supported her mother, who was still slightly unsteady on her feet. Are you sure you're up for this? Sarah asked quietly. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's arm. I wouldn't miss it for the world. If there's even a chance of finding out what happened to Thomas and Emily, I need to be there. They climbed into the back seat of the cruiser, watching as Tyler got into his pickup truck. As the small convoy pulled out of the junkyard, the sun blazed high in the clear afternoon sky, casting sharp shadows across the crushed red Cadillac. The fluorescent lights of the Portland Police Department cast harsh shadows across the faces of everyone seated in the small conference room. Sarah and Eleanor sat on one side of the table, Detective Ramirez and another officer across from them, while Tyler Bennett had given his statement in a separate room. Let's go through the timeline again, Detective Ramirez said, opening a thick file folder. Sometimes fresh eyes on old details can reveal something we've missed. Sarah nodded, her hands clasped tightly on the table. Thomas and Emily left on a Saturday morning, October 12, 1984. Thomas had his dental practice here in Portland. He was well respected, had built it from nothing. He had this distinctive style about him, the mustache, his colorful ties. His patients loved him. And Emily, Detective Ramirez prompted gently. A small smile touched Sarah's lips. She was 8, so bright, so full of energy. She adored her father, followed him everywhere when she wasn't in school. You didn't go on the trip with them? The second officer asked, making notes. Sarah shook her head. Mom needed help that weekend. She was moving some furniture, rearranging her house after Dad passed. It was supposed to be just one night, a quick trip to Bend. Thomas wanted to show Emily the fall foliage in the mountains, maybe visit some natural attractions. They were supposed to be back Sunday evening. And when did you first realize something was wrong? Detective Ramirez asked, though he surely knew the answer from the file before him. Sunday night, Sarah replied, her voice growing distant. Thomas had promised to call when they left Bend. When I hadn't heard from him by dinner time, I tried the motel. They said Thomas and Emily had checked out that morning. I called his friends' relatives. No one had heard from them. By Monday morning, I went to the police. Eleanor reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. We've been looking ever since. Detective Ramirez nodded solemnly. The investigation at the time was thorough. Officers checked surveillance footage from gas stations and stores along their route. They interviewed the motel staff diners in the area. Thomas's credit cards and bank accounts were never used again. His dental practice remained untouched. The technology back then wasn't what it is now, the second officer added. No cell phones to track, fewer cameras. We did what we could. And now, 16 years later, his car shows up in a junkyard, Sarah said, her voice tight with emotion, brought in by a man who matches Thomas's description. A heavy silence fell over the room. Detective Ramirez closed the file folder and leaned forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Williams, I have to ask, is it possible that your husband left voluntarily? Sarah stiffened. No, absolutely not. We had a good marriage. He adored Emily. His practice was thriving. There was no reason for him to leave. People sometimes have secrets, Detective Ramirez said gently. Lives they keep hidden from even those closest to them. Not Thomas, Sarah insisted. And even if that were true, which it isn't, he would never have taken Emily from me. Never. The door to the conference room opened and a female officer entered. Tyler Bennett's statement has been processed, she informed Detective Ramirez. He's waiting in the lobby. Detective Ramirez nodded. Thank you. He turned back to Sarah and Eleanor. We'll continue investigating this new lead. The car will be thoroughly examined and we'll try to trace its movements over the past 16 years. In the meantime, I recommend you both go home and get some rest. It's been a long day. Sarah glanced at her watch, surprised to see it was past 2 p.m. Yes, I suppose we should. We can have an officer drive you, Detective Ramirez offered, standing. They made their way to the station lobby where Tyler was sitting in a plastic chair scrolling through his phone. He stood when he saw them approaching. All done, and he asked. Yes, Sarah replied. Thank you for your cooperation. Detective Ramirez nodded. For today. We'll be in touch if we have more questions, Mr. Bennett. Tyler glanced at Sarah and Eleanor. I could give you a ride. I live in the Hyde Park area. Detective Ramirez looked dubious. That's not necessary, Mr. Bennett. We can arrange. But before the detective could finish, a uniformed officer approached Detective Ramirez with an urgent message, drawing him away from the group. In his absence, Sarah assessed their situation. Her mother was exhausted, and they faced a longer wait for a police escort or a taxi. We'd appreciate the ride, Sarah decided, ignoring the flicker of unease in her stomach. Tyler had cooperated fully with the police, and they knew where he worked. There was no rational reason to refuse. I'll let Detective Ramirez know, she added, stepping away to speak with the detective, who was still engaged with the officer. Are you sure about this? Eleanor whispered when Sarah returned. The police have his information. It'll be fine. Detective Ramirez returned, looking reluctant but resigned when Sarah informed him of their decision. I've got his license plate and contact information, he assured them. Call immediately if there's any problem. Tyler's pickup was old but well-maintained. He opened the passenger door for Eleanor, helping her climb into the cab, then waited as Sarah settled into the middle seat. Where in Hyde Park are you? Tyler asked as they pulled out of the police station parking lot. Hawthorne near 45th, Sarah replied. Keeping her tone neutral, Tyler nodded. I'm on Avenue H, not far from there at all. Funny we've never crossed paths before. Thank you again for the ride, Sarah said. The afternoon in Portland was relatively quiet today as they headed north. Tyler maintained a casual conversation, asking about the neighborhood, commenting on changes to the city over the years. Suddenly, Eleanor gasped and began patting her pockets and purse. What's wrong, Mom? Sarah asked, alarmed. My inhaler, Eleanor said, her voice tight with worry. I think I left it at the junkyard office when I had that attack earlier. Are you feeling okay? Sarah asked, concerned. I'm fine now, Eleanor assured her, but I need that inhaler. It's my prescription one, and I just got it last week. It was expensive. Tyler glanced over at them. I have asthma too. If you need an inhaler, I have a spare at my place. We could swing by and pick it up. Sarah shook her head. That's very kind, but maybe we could just stop at a pharmacy. There must be one somewhere. It's a prescribed inhaler, Eleanor insisted. I don't want to waste money on another one when mine is probably sitting on a desk at the junkyard. We could just go back and get it. Now, Sarah asked, surprised, but the junkyard is an hour away. I don't mind driving you back, Tyler offered. Really, it's no trouble. We couldn't ask you to do that, Sarah protested. We can take a taxi instead. Eleanor shook her head firmly. That would be so expensive, Sarah. Mr. Bennett is offering to help us. Please call me Tyler, he said. And seriously, I don't mind. That junkyard is practically my second home. We can be there and back in a couple of hours. Sarah looked at her mother's determined face and sighed. If you're sure, Mom. I am, Eleanor said. I don't want to waste a perfectly good inhaler. It's settled then, Tyler said, signaling to turn around at the next intersection. Back to Eugene we go. The dashboard clock showed 3:05 p.m. as Tyler's pickup truck pulled into Miller's auto salvage junkyard. The police had finished processing the scene, though the crushed Cadillac remained cordoned off with yellow tape. Only a few employees were still working, moving parts and organizing scrap metal in the distance. The three of them climbed out of the truck and made their way to the main office. Frank Miller was behind the counter, looking surprised to see them again. Tyler, Mrs. Williams, I thought you all left with the police hours ago. We did, Tyler explained, but Mrs. Parker believes she left her inhaler here during her asthma attack earlier. Frank's face softened with understanding. Oh, I see. Yes, actually, I found it after everyone left. I put it in Tyler's office for safekeeping, figuring he'd know how to get it back to you. How thoughtful, Eleanor said. Would you mind if I get it now? It's my prescription one, and I'd hate to have to replace it. Of course, Frank replied. Tyler, you've got the key. Tyler nodded, fishing his key ring from his pocket. Sarah and Eleanor walked down the hallway toward Tyler's office. He told them he'd just step inside to grab the medication. Sarah sank into one of the worn plastic chairs, her exhaustion from the day's events clearly etched on her face. Eleanor, however, paced just outside the doorway. As Tyler opened the door and disappeared inside, Eleanor frowned, narrowing her eyes with suspicion, as if something had caught her attention. How are you holding up, Mom? Weir asked quietly, taking the seat beside her. I'm okay, Eleanor assured her, just a bit overwhelmed by everything. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant clanging of metal from the junkyard. A few minutes passed, and Sarah found herself growing restless. What's taking him so long? It's just an inhaler. Eleanor shifted in her seat, then suddenly straightened, her eyes widening. Sarah, she whispered urgently, when Tyler opens the door to come out, look at the top shelf of the glass cabinet across from the door. What? Why? Sarah asked, confused by her mother's sudden intensity. I caught a glimpse when he went in, Eleanor explained hurriedly. I think I saw a blue handbag up there between some books. It looks like Emily's. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. That's impossible, Mom. Emily's bag was with her when she disappeared. Just look, Eleanor insisted. It's the exact same shade of blue. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of footsteps announced Tyler's return. As the office door swung open, both women instinctively looked past him into the office. Through the doorway, Sarah could see a glass-fronted cabinet against the far wall. And there, on the top shelf, nestled between several technical manuals, was a small blue handbag, exactly the shade that Emily had carried with her everywhere. Tyler stepped out, holding Eleanor's inhaler. Found it on my desk, he said, handing it to her. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the glimpse of blue visible through the closing door. Tyler, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. That blue bag in your office? Tyler turned, following her gaze back to his office. Oh, that old thing. He sounded casual, but Sarah noticed a slight stiffening in his posture. It looks exactly like my daughter's, Sarah said, the one she had with her when she disappeared. Tyler hesitated for just a moment, then shrugged. Really, that's quite a coincidence. Would you mind if I took a closer look? Sarah asked, already rising from her chair. Tyler seemed to consider this for a moment, then shrugged. Sure, I guess. It's nothing special, just an old bag that belonged to my daughter. I didn't know you had a daughter, Frank commented from behind the counter. Tyler shot him a quick look. She's not with us anymore. She lives with her mother in Seattle. Sir and Eleanor followed Tyler back to his office. He unlocked the door again and went straight to the cabinet, reaching up to retrieve the blue handbag from the top shelf. Here it is, he said, handing it to Sarah. My daughter wasn't much of a girly girl, but she got this for her birthday 1 year from school. Never really liked it or wanted to use it, so I just kept it here. Sarah took the bag with trembling hands. It was exactly the same size and style as the one she'd bought for Emily in 1984. A small, rectangular handbag with a white trim and a simple clasp. Emily had saved her allowance for weeks to buy it, insisting it was grown up enough for her to carry everywhere. This looks like a vintage piece, Sarah said, carefully turning the poem over in her hands. What year did your daughter receive this? Tyler shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Oh, I don't remember exactly. Few years back. It's identical to a bag that was popular in the early 80s, Eleanor remarked, watching Tyler's face closely. I'm surprised they still make them in this style. Yeah, well, you know how fashion cycles back around, Tyler said with a bit dismissive wave of his hand. Vintage is in again, I guess. Sarah opened the bag, but it was empty. She examined the interior, carefully running her fingers along the lining. It's in remarkably good condition for a child's bag. Like I said, she barely used it, Tyler replied. You can keep it if you want. I've just been keeping it here gathering dust. Sarah's head snapped up. You'd give away your daughter's birthday present? Tyler shrugged. It's not like she's missing it. Besides, if it brings you some comfort, reminds you of your daughter. Why not? That's very generous, Sarah said slowly. Are you sure? Why, absolutely, Tyler said, his expression unreadable. Didn't the police see this when they searched your office earlier? Eleanor asked suddenly. Tyler nodded. Yeah, they looked at everything. I told them it was my daughter's and they moved on. Just a personal item. Nothing suspicious about it. Eleanor took the bag from Sarah and turned it over, examining it more closely. Inside, she found a small, white ribbon tag sewn into the lining. She squinted at it, then frowned. There's no manufacturer information on this tag, she said, showing it to Sarah. It looks like something was printed here before, but it's been erased somehow. Sarah leaned in to look. Sure enough, the white tag bore faint traces of what might have once been text, but it was now impossible to read. That's strange, she murmured, then looked up at Tyler. What kind of birthday present doesn't have any tags or branding? I wouldn't know, Tyler said, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. It was given by a friend at her school. Sarah ran her fingers over the material of the bag, again noting the familiar texture and weight of it. It felt exactly like Emily's bag, the one she'd been so proud to carry, the one she insisted on taking everywhere, even on that final road trip with her father. We'll keep it, Eleanor announced, suddenly clutching the bag to her chest. If you're sure it's okay. Like I said, it's just gathering dust here, Tyler repeated, gesturing toward the door. Now, if there's nothing else, I should probably be getting you two back to Portland to do that. As they walked back through the junkyard toward Tyler's truck, Sarah and Eleanor exchanged meaningful glances. Neither spoke until they were seated in the vehicle, and Tyler had stepped away briefly to speak with Frank. It's Emily's bag, Eleanor whispered urgently. I'm sure of it. The tag has been tampered with to remove the brand and production year. Sarah nodded, her mind racing. But how would Tyler have Emily's bag? And why would it be in his office? I don't know, Eleanor replied, but something isn't right here. First, Thomas's car shows up in this junkyard brought in by Tyler. And now this bag that looks exactly like Emily's is in his office. Let's not jump to conclusions, Sarah cautioned, though her own suspicions were mounting. This could all be a strange coincidence. Do you really believe that? Eleanor asked, her eyes piercing. Before Sarah could respond, Tyler climbed back into the driver's seat. All set, he asked cheerfully, as if the strange encounter with the blue handbag had never happened. Yes, Sarah replied, forcing a smile. Thank you again for your help today. Tyler started the engine and pulled out of the junkyard. As they headed back toward Portland, Sarah clutched the blue handbag in her lap, her fingers tracing the familiar contours. The day had stretched into late afternoon as Tyler's pickup truck rejoined the northbound traffic on Interstate 5. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, the blue handbag clutched tightly in her lap, while Eleanor occupied the back seat, her newly recovered inhaler safely tucked into her purse. The silence in the car felt weighted with unspoken questions. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. How could Tyler have a bag so identical to Emily's? And why had he been so eager to give it away? I can't thank you enough for all your help today, Sarah said, finally breaking the silence. It's been quite a day. Tyler nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. Happy to help. Finding that car must have been quite a shock for you both. 16 years of wondering, Sarah said softly. And then to find Thomas's car like that. Tell me about them, Tyler said, his voice casual. Your husband and daughter. What were they like? Sarah hesitated, studying Tyler's profile. His expression seemed genuinely interested, but something about the question made her uneasy. Still talking about Thomas and Emily had always been a way to keep their memory alive. Thomas was a wonderful dentist, she began. He had this way with patients, especially children. They weren't afraid of him. He'd tell silly jokes and wear these ridiculous ties with pleated patterns on them. A small smile touched Tyler's lips. Sounds like a character. He was, Sarah agreed. And Emily, she was so full of life, smart, curious about everything. She was a little fashionista, even at 8 years old, always concerned about how she looked, what she wore. That's why she loved that blue bag so much, Tyler asked, nodding toward the handbag in Sarah's lap. Yes, Sarah replied, stroking the vinyl surface. She saved her allowance for weeks to buy it. It was from the Barbie accessory collection, a limited edition. She carried it everywhere. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed Thomas and Emily standing in front of the red Cadillac. Thomas's arm was around his daughter's shoulders, his mustache prominent above his wide smile. Emily beamed at the camera, her pink outfit bright against the car's crimson paint. This is them, Sarah said, holding out the photo for Tyler to see. This was taken about a month before they disappeared. Tyler barely looked at the photo before returning his eyes to the road. Nice-looking family, he commented. She was missing her 2 upper teeth, and Tyler inhaled deeply as if savoring the thought. That pink rainbow shirt. Sarah froze her eyes, darting to Tyler's face. He had barely glanced at the photo not long enough to notice such specific details, and she hadn't mentioned that the rainbow was on Emily's shirt or that it was her upper teeth that were missing. In the back seat, Eleanor had gone completely still. Sarah could feel her mother's eyes boring into the back of Tyler's head. Yes, Sarah said carefully, returning the photo to her purse with trembling hands. That's right. The rest of the drive passed in uncomfortable silence. Sarah noticed Tyler frequently glancing at her through the rearview mirror, though each time she looked up, his eyes would dart back to the road. She wasn't sure if he was watching her or the blue handbag she held. When they finally reached Barnyard's house in North Portland, the relief was palpable. Tyler pulled up to the curb and put the truck in park. Here we are, safe and sound, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank you again, Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral as she opened the door. For everything. My pleasure, Tyler replied. Let me know if you need anything else. I'm in the book, Tyler Bennett. Eleanor had already exited the back seat and stood waiting on the sidewalk. Sarah joined her, and they both watched as Tyler drove away, his truck disappearing around the corner. Without a word, they hurried up the walkway to the house. Sarah's hands shook as she unlocked the door, and once inside, she quickly locked it behind them, sliding the deadbolt into place. Did you hear what he said in the car? Eleanor asked immediately, her voice barely above a whisper despite the fact they were alone. About Emily's teeth in the rainbow shirt. Sarah nodded, sinking into the nearest chair, the blue handbag still clutched in her hands. He couldn't have seen those details from just glancing at the photo while driving. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes wide. Sarah, is there any possibility that Tyler could have known Emily or Thomas, that he's hiding something? Mom, that's a terrible accusation, Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. We don't have any evidence. Maybe he had sharp eyes. It could be. Some people have photographic memories. They were both silent. Sarah stared down at the handbag, turning it over in her hands. If this was really Emily's handbag, it would have her name in it, she said slowly. Remember, I used to write her name with a permanent marker on all her belongings so they wouldn't get switched with her friends? I remember, Eleanor nodded. She was very angry when I wanted to write her name in this handbag. Sarah continued, a distant smile touching her lips at the memory. So we decided to stick a sticker inside for identification instead. She looked up at her mother. Plus, this bag style was quite popular back then. I bought her the original limited edition Mattel Barbie accessory pack. We saw other children her age with similar bags in different colors. There were even other brands that made similar models and sold them at department stores. Eleanor nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Still, it's an awful lot of coincidences, don't you think? Sarah fell silent, running her fingers along the seams of the handbag. The material felt right, exactly as she remembered Emily's bag, and the white tag inside with its mysteriously erased printing. Let's go to an antique shop, Eleanor said suddenly. Have an expert there check this bag. If it's truly a vintage piece from the 80s, They'll be able to tell us, and we'll go to the police. Sarah considered this for a moment, then nodded decisively. You're right. Let's get an expert opinion. If this really is from the Mattel limited edition collection, someone who knows vintage items would be able to confirm it. She rose from her chair, the blue handbag still in her hand. I'll get the car keys, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. There's that antique shop on Burnett Road. If we hurry, we can get there before they close. Eleanor stood as well, her earlier exhaustion seemingly forgotten in the face of this new lead. Let's go. We need to know what we're dealing with. As they headed for the door, Sarah clutched the blue handbag tightly. Sarah's sedan pulled out of the driveway and into the golden light of the late afternoon. She gripped the steering wheel tightly while Eleanor sat beside her, the blue handbag nestled securely in her lap. Burnett Antiques should still be open, Sarah said, checking her watch. Mr. Keller has always been knowledgeable about vintage collectibles. Traffic was moderate as they made their way across town, neither woman speaking much. The weight of the day's discoveries hung between them. First Thomas's crushed Cadillac, and now this handbag that so closely resembled Emily's prized possession. Do you really think this could be Emily's bag? Eleanor asked quietly, tracing the white trim with her fingertip. Sarah kept her eyes on the road. I don't know what to think anymore, Mom. If it was Emily's and Tyler was lying, why would he keep it all these years? 20 minutes later, they pulled into the small parking lot of Burnett Antiques, a modest storefront, wedged between a bakery and a hardware store. A bell jingled as they pushed open the door, and the scent of old books and furniture polish enveloped them. The shop was cluttered but organized with glass display cases containing jewelry and small collectibles, while larger furniture pieces were arranged throughout the open space. A man in his 60s looked up from behind the counter, smiling in recognition. Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Parker, he greeted them. What a pleasant surprise. How can I help you ladies today? Hello, Mr. Keller, Sarah replied. We were hoping you might be able to tell us something about this handbag. She gestured to Eleanor, who placed the blue bag on the counter. Mr. Keller adjusted his glasses and peered down at it. Interesting piece, children's accessory circa early 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. He turned it over in his hands. But this isn't really my specialty. Let me call Robert from the back. He's much better with these sorts of items. He disappeared through a curtained doorway, returning a moment later with a younger man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. This is Robert Kay, Mr. Keller explained. He's our specialist for vintage toys and collectibles. His wife is a serious Barbie collector, so if anyone can identify this piece properly, it's him. Ladies, Robert nodded in greeting. Let's have a look at what you have brought. He took the handbag and carried it to a better-lit section of the counter. With practiced hands, he examined the material, the stitching, and the hardware of the clasp. He opened it and checked the interior, his fingers tracing along the seams. May I ask what specifically you'd like to know about this item? He asked, looking up at Sarah and Eleanor. We'd like to confirm if it's an original Mattel product from their limited edition Barbie accessory line in the early 1980s, Sarah explained, and if possible, the exact year it was produced. Robert nodded and returned his attention to the bag. He pulled a jeweler's loop from his pocket and examined the stitching more closely. The quality of the vinyl and the stitching pattern is consistent with Mattel's production standards from that era, he said. The specific blue color was part of their Barbie World collection, if I recall correctly. He continued his examination, checking the zipper and hardware. The zipper pull has the characteristic Mattel shape from that period. He reached for his phone. Let me call my wife quickly. She'll know more specific details. As Robert stepped away to make the call, Sarah and Eleanor exchanged hopeful glances. He seems to think it's authentic, Eleanor whispered. But that doesn't prove it's Emily's, Sarah cautioned. Just that it's from the right time period. Robert returned a few minutes later, setting his phone down. My wife confirms this is almost certainly from the Mattel Barbie accessory collection, specifically from their 1983 to 1984 limited edition run. They only produced this particular shade of blue for about 8 months. He turned his attention to the white tag inside the bag. This is interesting, though, he said, frowning slightly. The identification tag has been tampered with. Tampered with? Sarah leaned closer. Robert nodded, pointing to the tag with a pen. See how the fabric is slightly puckered around the edges, and this discoloration here? He indicated several spots on the small white ribbon. It appears someone deliberately removed the printing, likely using some kind of heat treatment, probably a household iron. He turned the tag toward the light. You can still see where the ink was. The heat weakened and essentially plasticized the surface of the tag. It doesn't smell of burning polyester anymore, but the damage pattern is characteristic of heat application. He pointed to the surrounding fabric. There is also slight physical wear showing signs of damage to the lining around the tag, also consistent with heat treatment. Someone deliberately attempted to remove whatever identifying information was printed here. Sarah's heart pounded. Could it have just faded naturally over time? Robert shook his head. No, this is deliberate. Natural fading would affect the entire tag uniformly. This shows concentrated damage specifically where the printing would have been. He looked up at them curiously. If you don't mind my asking, why is this particular bag so important? Sarah hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. It's very similar to one my daughter had many years ago. I was curious if it could be the same model. Robert nodded, seemingly satisfied with the explanation. Well, I can tell you with confidence that this is an original Mattel product from their 1983 to 1984 line. My wife would be happy to provide more details if you'd like to bring it by sometime when she's here. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice slightly unsteady. You've been extremely helpful. Robert carefully handed the bag back to her. Is there anything else you'd like to know about it? No, that's all we needed, Eleanor replied, reaching for her purse. What do we owe you for your time? Robert waved away the suggestion. Nothing at all. Always happy to help identify a vintage piece. They thanked both men and made their way back to the car. Once inside, with the doors closed, Eleanor turned to Sarah, her expression grave. Sarah, someone deliberately removed the identification from this bag, she said quietly. Sarah stared down at the handbag in her lap, her fingers tracing the outline of the heat-damaged tag. I know. We need to take this to the police, Eleanor said firmly. They need to know about Tyler's connection to both Thomas's car and this bag. Sarah nodded slowly. You're right. Even if this isn't Emily's, even if Tyler's daughter really did just accept it from a school friend, the police should know. She started the car, her hands steadier now that they had a plan. We'll go straight to the police station. Detective Ramirez should still be there. As they pulled out of the parking lot, the blue handbag rested between them. Sarah's mind filled with questions about Tyler Bennett and his connection to her family's disappearance. Questions she hoped the police might finally be able to answer. They had only driven a few blocks from the antique shop when Sarah noticed the brake warning light illuminate on her dashboard. The car began to shudder slightly, and she frowned. That's strange, she murmured, tapping the brake pedal experimentally. The response felt sluggish. What's wrong? Eleanor asked, looking up from the blue handbag she'd been examining. I'm not sure. The brake light just came on. Sarah pressed the pedal again, and this time it went almost to the floor. Something's definitely not right. The car began to lose power as they approached an intersection. Sarah quickly signaled and pulled over to the side of the road before the vehicle could completely stall out. She put it in park and turned off the ignition, then tried to restart it. The engine sputtered but wouldn't catch. This has never happened before, Sarah said, confused. She stepped out of the car and walked around to the front, opening the hood. Steam wasn't coming out, and nothing looked obviously wrong to her untrained eye, but she knew something serious had failed. Should we call a tow truck? Eleanor asked, joining her daughter at the front of the car. I suppose we'll have to, Sarah replied, reaching for her cell phone. So much for getting to the police station tonight. As she was about to dial, a pickup truck pulled over behind them. Sarah's stomach tightened as she recognized Tyler Bennett climbing out of the driver's side. A second man, taller with a heavier build, emerged from the passenger door. Sarah, Eleanor, Tyler called, approaching them with a look of concern. Everything okay? I was just driving by and saw you pulled over. Sarah forced a smile, though unease prickled at the back of her neck. What a coincidence. We're having some car trouble. The brake light came on, and then the car just lost power. Tyler and his friend moved to the front of the car, peering under the hood. This is my buddy Max, Tyler said, gesturing to the other man. He's pretty good with cars. Max nodded at them before bending to examine the engine. What happened exactly? Sarah repeated the symptoms while Max prodded at various components. After a few minutes, he straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Looks like your brake line is leaking fluid, he said. And it might have affected your transmission too. Not safe, learn to drive like this. Can you fix it here? Sarah asked. Max shook his head. Nah, this needs proper tools. Parts too, probably. Tyler stepped forward. Where were you headed? Maybe we can give you a lift. We were going to the police station, actually, Eleanor said, clutching her purse tightly. The police station? Tyler's eyebrows rose. Everything okay? Yes, just some follow-up about Thomas's car, Sarah said, vaguely reluctant to mention the handbag. Well, I can call for a tow and have your car brought to the junkyard, Tyler offered. We've got all the tools there, and I can get it fixed up for you. Probably cheaper than a regular garage, too. That's very kind, Sarah began, but I'd like to go to the police station first, Eleanor interrupted firmly. We can deal with the car afterward. Tyler and Max exchanged a quick glance that Sarah almost missed. Mom, Sarah said, touching Eleanor's arm, maybe it makes more sense to deal with the car first. We can always call Detective Ramirez from the junkyard if needed. Sarah's right, Tyler said smoothly. No sense letting the car sit out here all night. Let me call our tow truck from a friend's company and we'll get this sorted out. Before either woman could protest further, Tyler had pulled out his phone and made a call. They'll be here in about 10 minutes, he announced after a brief conversation. The next several minutes passed in uncomfortable silence. Sarah could feel Eleanor's disapproval radiating beside her, and she could understand her mother's sudden hostility toward Tyler. Yes, the coincidences were troubling, but Tyler had been nothing but helpful since they'd met, and maybe he could explain about the bag to police too. The tow truck arrived exactly when Tyler had predicted, emblazed with a different company logo. The driver, a burly man with tattoos covering his forearms, barely spoke as he hooked up Sarah's car. All set, Tyler said as the tow truck pulled away with Sarah's sedan. You ladies can ride with us to the junkyard. We'll get that car fixed up in no time. Sarah and Eleanor hesitated by Tyler's pickup truck. Eleanor lingered by the rear bumper, her eyes narrowing as she studied the license plate. You coming? Tyler called, already climbing into the driver's seat with his tall friend next to him. Yes, of course, Sarah replied, opening the passenger door. Eleanor remained where she was, staring at the plate number. Mom, Sarah called. With visible reluctance, Eleanor finally moved toward the truck. As she climbed into the back seat, she whispered very lowly in Sarah's ear, I don't like this idea. I have a bad feeling about this. We should have called the police for help. Sarah patted her mother's hand reassuringly, but a flicker of doubt had ignited in her mind. Why had Tyler appeared so conveniently just as their car broke down, and why was he so insistent on taking them to the junkyard? Actually, Tyler, I've changed my mind, she said. It would be more helpful if you could drop us off at the police station instead of heading back to the junkyard. Sure, Tyler said. As Tyler navigated through the streets, Sarah noticed that Eleanor was hunched over in the back seat, her hands hidden in her lap. She realized her mother was surreptitiously texting on her phone, shielding the screen from view. After about 15 minutes of driving, Sarah frowned, looking out the window at unfamiliar surroundings. Tyler, this doesn't seem like the way to the police station. Taking a shortcut, he replied, not meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. Less traffic this way. Max, who had been mostly silent until now, turned in his seat to look back at them. His expression had hardened, all previous friendliness gone. Tyler, Eleanor said sharply, where are you taking us? This is not the way. Tyler's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. Change of plans, he said, his voice suddenly cold. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Max reached under his seat and pulled out a small handgun with what appeared to be a silencer attached. He also produced 2 sets of handcuffs. Put these on, he ordered, holding out the handcuffs to Sarah and Eleanor. Both of you, now. Sarah stared at the gun in shock. Tyler, what is this? What's going on? Put the handcuffs on, Max repeated, his voice harder this time. When they hesitated, he suddenly shouted, Now put them on or I'll shoot. His sudden aggression was terrifying and both women flinched. With trembling hands, Sarah took the cold metal cuffs and snapped one end around her right wrist, then the other around her left. Beside her, Eleanor did the same. Max reached back again and roughly checked that the handcuffs were secure. Satisfied, he then produced 2 handkerchiefs from his pocket, balled them up and shoved one into Sarah's mouth. Then Eleanor's. That blue bag, Max said, reaching over and snatching it from Eleanor's lap. It's not yours anymore. He pushed both women harshly, forcing Sarah down onto the floor of the back seat while Eleanor was shoved sideways across the back seat. Tyler's eyes met Sarah's in the rearview mirror, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Be quiet," he said coldly, "or you'll never see another daylight." As the truck continued down the increasingly rural road, Sarah's mind raced with terror. The blue handbag had been important enough to Tyler that he was willing to kidnap them for it. Whatever connection it had to Emily and Thomas Tyler was clearly desperate to keep that information hidden. Through her fear, Sarah caught Eleanor's eye. Her mother's expression communicated a clear message. "I texted someone. There's hope." Tyler turned the truck onto a narrow dirt road, trees closing in around them as they left civilization behind. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, praying that whoever Eleanor had contacted would find them before it was too late. The dirt road twisted through dense pine trees for several miles before opening onto a clearing. In the fading light of early evening, Sarah could make out a dilapidated farmhouse with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Nearby stood a battered camper trailer, its once white exterior now a dingy gray. No other vehicles were visible, and the property appeared isolated from any neighboring farms. Tyler parked the truck about 50 yards from the house and turned off the engine. Max kept the gun trained on Sarah and Eleanor as Tyler came around to open the back door. "Get out," he ordered, roughly pulling Sarah from the floor of the truck. Eleanor followed, her legs unsteady after being cramped in the back seat. With their hands cuffed in front of them and gags still in their mouths, the women were helpless as Tyler and Max marched them toward the farmhouse. As they passed the camper trailer, Sarah noticed it was rocking noticeably, as if someone inside was moving violently. Tyler nudged Max, snickering. "Looks like the boss is having his good time in there," he said, nodding toward the shaking trailer. Max laughed. "Yeah, we should wait until he's finished before giving him a new headache to deal with." He shoved Sarah forward. "These two women are going to be trouble." They continued to the farmhouse, climbing the creaking steps to the porch. Tyler pushed open the front door, revealing a dim interior that smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke. They were guided through a cluttered living room and down a hallway to what appeared to be an office. A desk with an old computer and telephone sat in one corner, while filing cabinets lined the opposite wall. An older man with graying hair sat in a chair near the window reading a newspaper. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face expressionless. "Watch these two," Tyler instructed him as Max removed the gags from Sarah and Eleanor's mouths. "We're going to get something to eat before the boss is done." The older man nodded, setting his newspaper aside. "Don't talk to the prisoners," Max added sharply. "Same as always." Tyler produced a length of chain, which he used to secure Sarah and Eleanor's handcuffs to a heavy metal radiator in the corner of the room. Once satisfied they couldn't escape, he and Max left, closing the door behind them. As soon as they were alone with the older man, Sarah began to plead. "Please help us. We haven't done anything wrong." "My daughter is the police detective," Eleanor added desperately. "She'll find us. If you help us now, they'll go easier on you." The older man remained silent, picking up his newspaper again, but not actually reading it. "Please," Sarah continued, her voice cracking. "We're just trying to find my daughter and husband. They disappeared 16 years ago." For several minutes, they continued calling out, begging for help, explaining their situation. The older man ignored them, occasionally glancing toward the door as if worried someone might overhear. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the door opened. The older man stood quickly, looking alarmed, but it was only him coming back into the room. He approached them with a stern expression. "Be quiet," he hissed harshly, "or they'll hurt you. You don't know what they're capable of." "Please," Eleanor said, her voice softer now. "I'm Eleanor Parker, and this is my daughter, Sarah Williams. We're looking for my granddaughter, Emily Williams. She was only 8 years old when she disappeared with her father 16 years ago. If she's here, please just let us know." The older man studied them with hard hues, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced toward the hallway, listening for any sign of Tyler or Max returning. Apparently satisfied they were alone, his face softened almost imperceptibly. "They call her Jessica in here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I knew her name was Emily because that's what they called her before they changed her name 4 years ago." Sarah gasped, her knees nearly buckling. "She's here. My Emily is here." The older man nodded curtly. "Keep your voice down," he warned. "Please help us." Sarah begged, tears streaming down her face. "You look different from those people. I can see you're a good man." "I can be a dead man for being a good man now," he replied grimly. Our years are short anyway, sir, Eleanor said, her voice gentle but urgent. Soon we're going to die and live in a different world according to our deeds. Please help us. The man seemed to wrestle with himself, conflict evident in his lined face. Then they heard footsteps in the hallway, and Eleanor whispered, please once more. The older man exhaled heavily, as if making a momentous decision. I do this for Jessica, he muttered, pulling a cell phone from his pocket. With trembling fingers, he quickly dialed 911, whispered the farmhouse's location, and hung up, slipping the phone back into his pocket just as the door opened. 3 men entered the room. Tyler Max and a large, muscular man dressed only in a dirty white tank top and boxer shorts. His bare legs were covered in coarse hair, and his arms bore faded tattoos. Sarah felt sick just looking at him, especially when she realized this must be the boss Tyler had mentioned. What are you doing in here, Walter? The boss demanded, his voice a deep rasp. The older man, Walter, took a step back, his face suddenly fearful. These women were noisy, brother. I was just telling them to be quiet, that's all. The boss studied him suspiciously, his eyes narrowing. Search him, he ordered Tyler and Max. If you find anything, deal with him. He fixed Tyler with a meaningful stare. Can you do that? Tyler nodded without hesitation. Yes, boss. Tyler and Walter left the room, leaving Sarah and Eleanor alone with Max and the boss. The large man approached them slowly, his eyes traveling over their bodies in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. So, he said, his voice thick with something that turned Sarah's stomach. Tyler tells me you're here for Jessica. He reached out and touched Sarah's hair, then leaned in to smell it. I like older women too, not just the young ones. Sarah jerked away from his touch, her handcuffs rattling against the radiator. Give her back to us, she demanded, summoning courage she didn't know she possessed. The boss laughed, a deep, unsettling sound. That can't happen, but I'll tell you what I can do. He turned to Max. Bring them in. Mao nodded and left the room, returning moments later with 3 women. They appeared to be in their mid-20s, all with similar builds and long brown hair. They stood with their heads bowed, not making eye contact with anyone. Here's the game, the boss announced, clearly enjoying himself. Pick which one is Jessica. No discussion allowed. You both have to point at the same time, and if you both get it right, I'll let you see her. Just see her, mind you. He grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. Sarah and Eleanor studied the 3 women desperately. They all had similar hair color to Emily, though they were now grown women rather than the 8-year-old girls Sarah had last seen. Sarah searched their faces for any hint of the daughter she had lost, any echo of the child she had raised. One woman, standing slightly to the left, had a small scar near her right eyebrow, just like the one Emily had gotten falling off her bicycle when she was 6. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she raised her cuffed hands to point. 1, 2, 3, point, the boss shouted. Sarah and Eleanor both pointed to the same woman, the one with the small scar. The boss's laughter filled the room. Well, I'll be damned. Family really can tell each other apart, can't they? He gestured to the other 2 women. Take these 2 away. Max escorted the other women out, leaving the boss, Sarah, Eleanor, and the woman they'd identified as Emily/Jessica in the room. Emily, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. Sweetheart, is it really you? The young woman didn't respond or even look up. Her expression remained blank, her eyes distant, as if she had retreated deep inside herself. Now for the real fun, the boss said, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. Jessica, strip. Sarah and Eleanor gasped in horror. No, Sarah cried. Please don't do this to her. Leave her alone. Stop it, Eleanor added, her voice shaking with anger and fear. The boss ignored them, focusing on Jessica. I said strip, now. To Sarah's horror, Jessica began to comply, her movements mechanical and her expression still vacant. She showed no emotion, no resistance, as if she had performed this act countless times before. That's it, the boss encouraged, then suddenly held up his hand. Wait, I have a better idea. He turned to Sarah with a cruel smile. More flavors would be nice. He approached Sarah and unlocked the chain from the radiator, though he left her handcuffs on. Grabbing her roughly by the arm, he dragged her to the center of the room, positioning her between Eleanor and Jessica. I like older women too, he repeated, running a thick finger down Sarah's cheek. Jessica, strip her for me. No, Sarah gasped, looking desperately at the young woman. Emily, I'm your mother, please. Jessica hesitated, something flickering briefly in her eyes. but her face remained expressionless as she took a step towards Sarah. Sarah tried to back away, but the boss held her firmly in place. "I like to play with my prey before consuming them," he said, laughing, as Sarah struggled against his grip. With a sudden, violent movement, he tore Sarah's blouse at the shoulder, exposing her skin. Sarah cried out more from terror than pain as the boss's hands began to roam over her body. Suddenly, the door burst open and Tyler rushed in, his face pale. "Boss, police are outside." The boss froze, his expression, shifting from lustful to furious in an instant. He shoved Sarah aside and grabbed Jessica's arm. "How the hell did they find us?" "They've surrounded the place," Tyler reported, his voice tight with fear. The boss swore violently, then turned to Tyler. "And these two," he quickly ordered, gesturing to Sarah and Eleanor, "will escape out the back." Tyler hesitated. "There's no way out, boss. They've got the whole perimeter covered." Enraged, the boss grabbed the gun from Tyler's waistband. "Then I'll do it myself," he snarled, aiming the weapon at Sarah, who stood frozen in the middle of the room. Before he could pull the trigger, Walter burst through the doorway and leapt in front of Sarah. Two shots rang out in quick succession, and Walter crumpled to the floor, blood spreading across his shirt. The boss tried to fire again, but the gun clicked empty. "Damn it!" he roared, tossing the weapon aside. "Give me another." Before anyone could move, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the farmhouse, followed by shouts of, "Police, drop your weapons!" Within seconds, armed officers flooded the room, their weapons trained on Tyler, Max, and the boss. Max immediately raised his hands in surrender, as did Tyler. The boss, however, lunged toward the nearest officer. A shot rang out, and the boss staggered back, clutching his thigh where the bullet had struck. Instead of falling, he laughed a chilling, manic sound. "Do you know how many bullets I've taken in my life?" he taunted, blood seeping between his fingers. Another officer fired, striking him in the shoulder. This time the boss fell to his knees, his face contorted with pain but still defiant. As the officers secured the scene, handcuffing the three men, paramedics rushed to Walter's side. Sarah, freed from her handcuffs by a female officer, immediately went to Jessica, who stood motionless in the chaos, her eyes vacant. "Emily," Sarah whispered, reaching out to touch her daughter's face. "It's me. It's Mom." There was no response, no recognition in those empty eyes. Whatever horrors Emily had endured over the past 16 years had left deep scars, not all of them visible. Eleanor, also freed from her restraints, joined them, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her granddaughter. "We found her, Sarah," she sobbed. "We finally found her." As the paramedics worked to stabilize Walter and the police led the handcuffed criminals away, Sarah held her daughter close, silently vowing that whatever it took, however long it might be, she would help Emily find her way back from the darkness that had claimed her. The flashing lights of police cruisers and ambulances bathed the farmhouse property in alternating red and blue. Officers swarmed the area, securing the scene and collecting evidence, while paramedics attended to the injured and traumatized. Sarah watched in a daze as Tyler, Max, and the man they called Boss were led from the farmhouse in handcuffs. Tyler kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone, while Max stared straight ahead, his face expressionless. The boss, despite his gunshot wounds, continued to smirk and laugh as officers shoved him into a waiting police cruiser. "Ma'am, we need to get you checked out," a female paramedic said, gently guiding Sarah toward one of the ambulances. Eleanor was already seated on the bumper of another ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders as a medic examined the abrasions on her wrists from the handcuffs. Sarah allowed herself to be led, her eyes never leaving Emily, who was being attended to by another paramedic. They had wrapped her in a thick blanket, and she sat motionless on a stretcher, staring at nothing. "You have a small laceration on your shoulder," the paramedic told Sarah, cleaning the area where the boss had torn her blouse. "It doesn't need stitches, but we should bandage it to prevent infection." Sarah barely heard her. "My daughter," she said, her voice trembling. "Is she all right?" The paramedic followed her gaze. "Physically, she appears uninjured," she said cautiously. "But she's not responding to questions. The doctor will want to evaluate her for psychological trauma when we get to the hospital." Sarah nodded numbly as the paramedic applied a bandage to her shoulder and wrapped a blanket around her. Across the yard, Eleanor had finished being examined and was making her way toward them, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes alert. "How is she?" Eleanor asked, nodding toward Emily. "In shock," Sarah replied, her voice breaking. "She doesn't recognize us, Mom." Give her time, Eleanor said, squeezing Sarah's arm. She's been through so much. A commotion near the farmhouse drew their attention. Paramedics were rushing a stretcher toward an ambulance. Walter, the older man who had saved Sarah's life. His chest was covered in blood-soaked bandages, and one medic was holding an IV bag above him as they moved. "We need to leave immediately," one of the paramedics called out. "He's lost a lot of blood. We need to get the bullets out." As they loaded Walter into the ambulance, a young officer approached Sarah and Eleanor. "The medics want to transport your daughter to the hospital right away," he explained. "She needs to be evaluated by specialists. They've advised you should be checked out more thoroughly as well." "Of course," Sarah said, her eyes still on Walter's ambulance as the doors closed. "That man, Walter, he saved my life. Will he be all right?" The officer's expression was carefully neutral. "They're doing everything they can for him." As they walked toward the ambulance where Emily waited, another paramedic approached them. "Before we go," he said, "I thought you should know Walter was able to tell us a few things while we were treating him. He said his name is Walter Bennett and Tyler Bennett is his son." Sarah stopped in her tracks. "His son?" The paramedic nodded. "He also said Tyler works for Victor Harris, the big guy in the tank top. Apparently Harris is Walter's stepbrother." Eleanor shook her head in disbelief. "That poor man, his own son abandoned him for a monster." "Oh, I need to go now," the paramedic said, guiding them toward the ambulance. "The detectives will speak with you at the hospital." Sarah and Eleanor climbed into the ambulance beside Emily, who sat still and unresponsive, her eyes fixed on some distant point. As the doors closed and the vehicle began to move, Sarah reached out tentatively to touch her daughter's hand. "Emily," she whispered, "we're here now. You're safe." There was no response, not even a flicker of recognition in those vacant eyes. Sarah exchanged a worried glance with Eleanor, who reached over to squeeze her shoulder supportively. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of sirens and lights. Upon arrival, they were separated, Emily taken to a treatment room for evaluation, while Sarah and Eleanor were guided to another area for more thorough examinations. When the doctors finally cleared them, they were led to a quiet consultation room to wait. Sarah sank into a chair, the events of the day catching up to her all at once. "I can't believe we found her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After all these years." "I know," Eleanor replied, taking the seat beside her. "It's like a miracle, but she's been through so much, Sarah. That awful man." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the images of what they had witnessed at the farmhouse. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in her own thoughts, until the door opened and Detective Gonzalez stepped in. "Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Parker, I'm glad to see you are both all right. This has been a shocking day for everyone involved." "Have you spoken with my daughter?" Sarah asked immediately. Detective Gonzalez shook her head. "The doctors are still evaluating her. She's physically unharmed, but they're concerned about her psychological state." "What about Walter?" Eleanor asked. "The man who saved us." "He's in surgery," the detective replied. "The doctors are optimistic, though. The bullets missed vital organs." "And the men who took us?" Sarah asked, her voice hardening. "Tyler and Victor Harris, was it?" Detective Gonzalez nodded. "All three are in custody. We've secured the blue handbag as evidence, and we're investigating the junkyard owner to see if he had any connection to Tyler's activities." "Did Tyler or Max tell you anything?" Eleanor pressed. "About Thomas and Emily? About what happened 16 years ago?" "We're still piecing everything together," Detective Gonzalez said carefully. "But we immediately recognized Victor Harris when we saw him. He's a wanted serial killer who's been evading capture for decades. He drifts from place to place under different aliases, manipulating people and harming them for his own entertainment." She hesitated. "He often keeps young women and girls, controlling them through intimidation and abuse before he—" Sarah felt physically ill at the thought of her daughter in that monster's hands for 16 years. How did Victor cross paths with Thomas and Emily? She asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. "Tyler has been cooperative since his arrest," said his time finally came. "He almost thought they were invisible," Detective Gonzalez explained. "He told us that he was 10 years old when it happened. He was with Victor, his step-uncle, whom he idolized. Victor presented himself as a strong male figure, unlike Tyler's father Walter, whom Tyler viewed as weak and poor." The detective paused, checking her notes. "According to Tyler, they were near sisters when they saw your husband's Cadillac. They pretended to be hitchhikers in need of help." Thomas pulled over and offered them a ride, and Victor claimed Tyler was his son and wasn't feeling well. Thomas even let them stay in an adjoining room at their motel in Bend. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. It sounded exactly like something Thomas would do, always willing to help others, always trusting. That night, Detective Gonzalez continued gently. Victor drugged Thomas's drink after they had spent the evening at a local diner. Once Emily was asleep, he strangled Thomas in the motel bathroom. Eleanor let out a small cry of anguish, and Sarah reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. As the detective continued, Victor staged the scene to make it appear as if Thomas had left voluntarily. He took Emily, telling her that her father was hurt and had been taken to the hospital. They left in a vehicle Victor had hidden nearby. Over time, he manipulated Emily into believing her mother was gone too. And with forged documents and by constantly relocating, he kept her hidden, changing her name to Jessica. "And my husband's body?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Tyler and his friend admitted they stayed behind to clean up. They made sure no traces at all. Victor disposed of Thomas's body in a limestone sinkhole and drove the Cadillac deep into a wooded area where it remained hidden until recently. "Then how did it end up at the junkyard last week?" Eleanor asked. "Tyler brought it in," Detective Gonzalez explained. "He knew where it had been abandoned all this time. With Victor's influence, he decided to move it to the junkyard to destroy it, hoping to erase any connection to his uncle. He thought 16 years was long enough that no one would make the connection." Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she had learned. Her husband had been murdered that very first night, while her daughter had endured 16 years of captivity and abuse. "We'll try to locate your husband's remains," Detective Gonzalez said softly, based on Tyler's information about the location. Before Sarah could respond, the door opened and a doctor entered. "Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Parker, your daughter has been moved to a private room. She's still not speaking, but she's stable. I believe having you with her will be beneficial." They followed the doctor through the hospital corridors to a quiet room where Emily lay in a bed staring blankly at the ceiling. She looked so small and fragile, despite being a grown woman now. Sarah approached the bed slowly, Eleanor right behind her. "Emily," she said softly, taking her daughter's hand. "It's Mom, and Grandma Eleanor is here too." For several long moments, there was no response. Sarah continued speaking gently, telling Emily that she was safe now that Victor and Tyler had been caught, that they would never let anyone hurt her again. Minutes stretched into an hour as Sarah and Eleanor took turns speaking to Emily, reminiscing about happy memories from her childhood, assuring her of their love. And then, just as Sarah was beginning to lose hope, Emily's lips parted. "I'm so sorry for being so broken," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "It's not your fault, sweetheart," she said, her voice breaking. "None of this was your fault. We're together now. That's all that matters." "I miss Daddy," Emily said, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Something in her voice and the way she said Daddy reminded Sarah painfully of the 8-year-old girl who had left on that fateful road trip. Though Emily was 24 now, part of her seemed trapped in that moment, frozen in time. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah said, stroking her daughter's hair. "I missed him too." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Excuse me, but Mr. Bennett is asking to see you. He's in the next room." Sarah hesitated, reluctant to leave Emily, but Eleanor touched her arm. "I'll stay with her. You go." Sarah followed the nurse to the adjacent room where Walter Bennett lay in a hospital bed, his chest heavily bandaged. He looked pale and weak, but his eyes were alert. "Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to apologize for my son and for myself, for staying quiet all these years." Sarah approached his bedside. "You saved my life," she said simply. "If not for your courage, we would still be in that farmhouse. We might never have found Emily." Walter closed his eyes briefly. "My son, he always hated gentle and kind men, saw it as weakness. So when they hitchhiked, pretending they needed help," Sarah said slowly, understanding dawning, "and my husband helped them. They saw him as a suitable prey because he was kind." Walter nodded weakly. "I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Sarah reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "You risked your life to save us. There's nothing to forgive." Leaving Walter to rest, Sarah returned to Emily's room. Her daughter had fallen asleep, her face peaceful for the first time since they'd found her. Eleanor sat beside the bed, watching over her granddaughter with tears in her eyes. Sarah took the chair on the other side of the bed, reaching out to hold Emily's hand. After 16 years of searching, of hoping against hope, they had found her. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but they would walk it together one day at a time. As she watched her daughter sleep, Sarah silently thanked whatever forces had led them to that junkyard today, to the crushed red Cadillac and the blue handbag that had finally brought her daughter home. If this story affected you as deeply as it did me, take a moment to reflect on what matters most in your life. The Williams family reminds us that evil exists in this world, but so does remarkable courage and unwavering love. For 16 years, Sarah Williams never stopped searching for her daughter and husband. Her determination ultimately brought Emily home, even when the rest of the world had moved on. As you go about your day, remember some bonds can never be broken, no matter how much time passes or what horrors intervene. And sometimes justice comes when you least expect it, in a junkyard with a blue handbag that shouldn't have been there. If you appreciated this true crime story, hit subscribe for more incredible tales of tragedy, perseverance, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep your loved ones close.